like to make a video about the history of the world, given all the things that I've learned thanks to Jewish people in my life. I know things that I wouldn't have otherwise. Know about Hebrew, know about the Torah, helped me learn about Arabic, about Islam, about the Quran, and also African American people who introduced me to the history of Kemet and its relation to Africa, which taught me things that I never learned through National Geographic or any of the mainstream sources of information about ancient Egypt. And those two things helped me understand a lot about the history of the world, and particularly the history of the Germanic language speaking people. So I'd like to elaborate on this. Kemet is one of the most ancient societies on Earth. And as you can see, the Nile River begins, in the heart of Africa, and we should be really looking at it like this, because this is the way that people in Kemet saw the world. And there's many different interactions between people in this region, and the river flows from the south to the north. And so when we think about Egypt, when we think about ancient Egypt, when we think about Kemet, it helps to think about Africa, because that's where the ideas came from. And one of my favorite people that talk about this is Mufundishy Jehutimus. He's got videos where he shows the connection between the archaeological evidence of the importance of falcons and their association with observation and consciousness, and these are things that came from the heart of Africa and became central to the worldview of people in Kemet. And Mesopotamians interacted with these people. Well, I'd say first would be the Persians. What I think is that what I believe is that since Kemet had become so advanced due to its geography, a Chilean Egyptologist had said that the sort of the north-south orientation of the Nile River oriented people in the Nile Valley to 3D space. And not only that, the current of the river made it so that sailboats were developed before anywhere else, because in order to return from where they came, they needed a sail. And so there's all these, there's like the Punt expedition, and all these other things which are recognized, yet I believe what Asra Kuwaisi says and many other of these experts say that the priests went and explored and went to far places, and so I believe that if we search enough, we'll find that the priesthood, which essentially were very observant people who had observed some order in the world and were communicating it through words, had established a practice and of some martial arts, some exercise, some way to stay fit. And these people influence the rest of the world around them, possibly as far as Eastern Asia. We know humans, according to anthropology, had migrated from Eastern Africa all the way to Australia. So, and that was just through, walking, and these were the very early humans. So, imagine what people with knowledge of sailboats and 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 knowledge of the world of the way that they are oriented in 3D space, they would have traveled, and so eventually Persia invaded Kemet, and before the Mesopotamian Hyksos had invaded. And there's an article by Dr. Joseph Weinstein on thetorah.com where he says, we were enslaved by Hyksos, which posits that the Hebrews of the Bible were enslaved by these assimilated Mesopotamian people. The word Pharaoh in Hebrew is from the Medu Neter word Paru, which means strong house. So it was originally in reference to the government. That's why I believe Ramses II was Moses. And because a lot of his miracles were illusions. And this is important because we see that illusions become part of the modern history of the Germanic speaking peoples, and it relates to the history of my family, which has been occulted. And or our family, I'd say. And so Hyksos assimilated to the ways of the people in Kemet. But they were also Hebrew people. I learned from a rabbi that the word Hebrew originally meant people that had crossed over. And I believe that word is connected to the word for west, or Eved, which is connected to the word, or Erev, sorry. The word Erev is connected to the word Arab. And yet the people that wrote the Torah lived in settlements in this area of the world. And so to create a distinction between the people who had migrated west and the people who had settled, I think this linguistic shift became um, solidified. There's a lot of other words in other languages that mean the same thing. So this could have been something that happened before. I could be wrong. Yet it seems interesting to me that the Quran, having so much wisdom and having so much knowledge, doesn't use the word Hebrew, the cognate of the word Hebrew in Arabic. And the 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 people of Moses then left and went to this land through the miracle of the flood, of the parting of the sea, which then later caused a flood and destroyed the other people. And that's an important thing which I think about, because God creates time for us, and He creates a way for us to be able to live and to do things at certain times, and saves us from certain things. And so time is something that I think about a lot when I think about God. And sometimes I say he, sometimes I say it. Yet studying Hebrew and hearing what people like Baba Haru have said about the balance in the worldview of the people of Kemet, there is a balance that is it's also in Hebrew, because the Sarah changes, or Sarai changes her name to Sarah, and that H at the end has a meaning that it's that she's the mother of the nations. That's what's taught in the Torah, and and so this gives Allah a the connotation of it being the source of everything. And I was taught that El, without the Ha at the end, it can mean God, yet it can mean to or towards. I was taught that by a Jewish man nicknamed Rindolph from Tel Aviv. And everything is trying to enter into balance. And one of the things that causes confusion and suffering is when we don't understand the things that are occurring in the world, and the injustices that are occurring in the world. And when we don't understand the world properly in terms of time. So we're thinking, right now we're talking about stuff that happened thousands of years ago. Something like 1500 BC. So that's more than 3,000 years ago. Given the DNA test that our family has, our ancestors, we have ancestors, Jewish ancestors from the 1500s. That's, our ancestors were likely part of this event. Even though I'm not from this part of the world and I feel more connected to Europe, or I used to feel more connected to Europe. Um, that we grew up practicing the Catholic religion, which is the religion created by the followers of Jesus Christ, who belong to the Jewish religion. And so all of these things are connected, fortunately, unfortunately. It's sort of strange to me because, from one hand, it seems like everything is really not authentic. Why are we so focused on this part of the world? What is so special about this part of the world? Why can't we have our own thing? That's sort of the feeling or the thought that sometimes occurs. Yet the more I learn, the more I understand why things happen. And so this part of the world is particularly unique and created a very unique culture because of the intermingling of and conflict between large groups of people, like the Persians and Kemet, the Mesopotamians and Kemet, and also the geography. This is a tectonic plate, and I learned from Afrocentrists that this all is Africa. This piece of land is all part of this. Suez Canal is a modern. This was built in the late 1800s, and the pharaohs had dug a canal. Yet this is all one land, one piece of land, and it's pushing up against Arabia, sliding against Arabia. It's a very complicated situation tectonically. And so this produced a very unique worldview. There was a Greek natural philosopher who had said that I can't remember which one, yet he had said that it was the landscape that created the culture and the people, the environment. And so we have very interesting culture. We have written word, and it's all part of a greater history of migration. I had mentioned before the Hebrew people. The Hebrew people could include the Phoenician people who migrated to Lebanon, around there, to the cities of Sidon and Tyre. And the Phoenician people were exceptionally influential in the ancient world because of their merchant navy. And they were one of the largest trading partners with Kemet. So it's interesting that we have sort of three large partners here between Kemet, Phoenicia, and Greece. And the word Phoenicia was given to these people by the Greeks. The Greek people ended up inheriting the culture from Kemet, studying in Kemet, and became rulers over Kemet, married into the families, and became part of Kemet. Yet the Hebrew people of Moses were also connected to Kemet, yet because of their humble, oppressed status, the sort of culture that arose from there was very different. The Greek histories say that Cadmus was the inventor of the Greek language, And there's these Greek genealogies comparable to the genealogies in the Bible. And they say that the Cadmus is the brother of Europa, which is the name, ended up becoming the name of the continent. And their parent was King Agenor of Tyre. And, of Tyre. And then the father of King Agenor was the deity Nilus, which was just the name Nile, the Nile River. Yet in these societies, many attributes and things were ascribed to words so that they became deities. And that's what Baba Haru explains, is that, Kemet was originally monotheist, yet it sort of created this whole way of thinking about words, of creating all of these concepts surrounding these words and observations. And then also there's a lot of things that were just invented because each sort of idea received its own attention and became its own cult, had a temple, and then new ideas were created just to create another temple, not because they were based on some fundamental or foundational observation. And there was an order, there was a network to these ideas which had become lost with new people invading, assimilating, conflicts between people, and just confusion, inequality. So what the priesthood believed and what the everyday people believed is very different. We see that today, again, with religion of any kind. So in Mesopotamia, you had a similar situation. And this is where the ancient word, the ancient name of Allah comes from. And so the Hebrew people of Moses became the inheritors of that wisdom in a very simple way, similar to how the original people of Kemet had seen the world. So it's almost like when we talk about karma, the word karma, I learned, means action. Yet sometimes we use it to refer to the consequences of our actions. And so karma is this idea of something occurring back to us because of our action. I see it in history, and I don't believe it's something that we can't fix the scales of justice. If we do something bad to someone else because we think that they did the bad thing, that falls upon us. It doesn't equal out, and somehow they get what they deserve or whatever. And so but that concept of justice was really important in Kemet, was the concept of ma'at, of balance. And so somewhere along the process, the balance was broken, and from that sort of injustice is where the Hebrew people of Moses sort of leave, and so it's a very different worldview from the other established people who had sort of followed Kemet into this dysfunction. Yet at the time, they would have been the most prominent, the most successful, most technologically advanced people. And the Phoenicians seem to have traded a lot of wood, and so softwoods like uh, like um, like pine trees and other conifers would grow in this region, and they float, and so people in Kemet would have wanted them. And it's likely that thousands of years ago, you know 3000 BC, there could have been pine trees accessible to these people all along the northwestern coasts of Africa. Yet, because of the desertification of the Sahara, it had for a period become greener, but it desertified like 12,000 years ago. So, um, and that is what really influenced the 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 formation of such a complex human society along this river. The Phoenician people, who I believe are Hebrew people, spread their influence across the Mediterranean. And this map that we're looking at right now is written in the Latin script of Rome, which was adopted from the Phoenician script. And the Phoenician script, like the Hebrew script, is a script that is based off of the Medu Neter. The Medu Neter is the script of ancient Kemet, taught to me by people like Baba Heru and Mufundisci Jehutimus. And a lot of scholarly sources say it's from the Sinai, and they try to remove it from Africa because they don't want it to be connected to black African people. Yet, what I believe is that the Medu Neter had developed for thousands of years in Kemet, and eventually the scribes ended up writing on papyrus. They were the first people to create paper-like material. And I say paper-like because our paper today uses different types of fibers, very small fibers, which are sort of plastered together. Whereas the papyrus is similar to that, yet it's interwoven. So, but from papyrus is where we get paper. So it is paper. Yet these people had, plants were a very important part of society. That's why I love the videos that Mufundisci Jehutimus makes, because he describes that and just, all these other interesting observations, ancient observations about nature, and so that cursive script is called hieratic script, and it must have been bound on scrolls and passed down to on sailboats to wherever people were doing business, and that was in Sidon and Tyre. And so, and Byblos is one of the other cities, and so when this language entered back into, actually probably Gaza too. Gaza What other cities could have been around then? Um, there were a lot of different ancient cities. The city of Egypt uh, was in on the delta. That's why we say Egypt. It was a city um, which the Greeks traded with, and and so so that cursive script had reverted back to stone, wood, and had become a more rudimentary shape, and that's how it was for a long time. Um, the people, the Hebrews of Moses, they found some things that may have been um, connected to Moses, and if you look at the way that they write, it was very sort of rudimentary. It looks like the Medu on stone, but he wasn't a scribe. That he was from the foreigners. He was from the enslaved Hebrew people, not the assimilated Hebrew people. And so it was a very rudimentary sort of symbolic, pictographic language, and that eventually became written on a scroll uh, when people were enslaved in Babylon. That's where the Torah was written. So Hebrew, as we know it, has gone through a long journey, yet it's connected to the script that we're using now, the Roman Latin script, because of its similar root to the Medu through Phoenician. And so people have wondered, where do the Germanic runes come from? Because in Denmark, they've found these symbols that look like they're derived from a Latin script or a Greek script, yet they're very different. And so what one linguist, Theo Veneman, had hypothesized is that they were originally from Carthage, which was a Phoenician colony in Tunisia, on this peninsula. They had fled and had established a colony there. The Phoenician merchant navy had been able to go all the way to Britain to harvest tin, the metal tin. And so imagine how much further they could go now that they're located much closer to the Strait of Gibraltar. And so from there, this would have been around the year 600 BC or even later. Uh, Possibly later than that. I think my dad had asked ChatGPT, and it said that the runes were developed in the first and third centuries. Yet, if you read Theo Veneman's research, It's in German, and I think what he had said was around 600 BC. And so, are the oldest of anything like it. Um, and so uh, the one of the observations of Theoveneman is that the the aleph of the Semitic writing system is a symbol of an animal with horns, usually an ox, a male cow that's used for breeding and work, and and uh, and so this was a symbol that was part of the Medu Neter, and this is the first symbol that is used in the Futhark sequence. This became the Futhark alphabet because this is the order of symbols that was found again and again in the oldest rune stones in Denmark. And so this is just the writing system, similar to the Greek writing system. All of the people that lived in this region were predominantly from the Indo-European migrations that occurred from the region that we call Ukraine, sort of this region here between the lakes. One of the lakes is now dried up. Yet basically all these people from this region here migrated up and up, and domesticated horses and colonized all of Europe. And so this is where we get the spoken word, most of the spoken word from. Yet the written system of the various Indo-European languages comes from this Medu Neter root through Phoenician, connected to Hebrew, connected to Arabic. And so Carthaginian sailors had somehow found their way to this part of the world. And so this first symbol in this sequence of symbols is called Fehu, which is related to the German word Vieh, that means cattle in German. Yet it looks similar to the symbol Aleph, or its Paleolithic ancestor. And so from there, then there's a lot of other comparisons that can be made. So what I believe is that the Carthaginian sailors went around Britain and went to Norway. They may have been able to pass through this place here, which is why maybe we believe in the Loch Ness Monster. It's because it was either a Viking or a Carthaginian ship that had been stuck there. And so the Carthaginian sailors brought what we see today as the Viking ship. If you look at the Viking ship and you compare it to the Phoenician ships, they look very similar. They even have the same colored sails, the white and the red stripes. And those ships came from from Kemet, because they had developed the sail ship, and then the sailboat, and then had began with reeds, so grasses and things like that, and then eventually became a wooden ship. And so the Phoenicians had more wood, and so they made better wooden ships, and so their wooden ship fleet could go farther. And eventually the Hebrew people of the Bible had ships too. There were Judean ships and all these. Many people in this part of the world had ship building capacities. The Greeks, were said to be these mysterious sea people. So at some point these sea people arrived. People aren't really sure where, but they came in ships, and so in some sort of boat. And so the Carthaginian people had the progenitor of what we call the Viking boat, and they sailed around. Now, I believe they sailed around because there hasn't been any Futhark runes found in France or Britain that are not connected to the Anglo-Saxon people or later migrations. So that's why I believe they went around. So they went around. And at that time, the climate could have been different. There could have been a warming, a changing of ocean currents, and so it was easier to do this. They went to Norway. From Norway, they went to Denmark. They probably would have gone to a place like Trondheim, or Bergen. And then eventually, it was too cold, so they naturally found their way. These people would have been Germanic language speaking people who were living together with these these ancient immigrants. Both were immigrants to this land. There could have been people similar to Siberian people who had lived there before. Siberian people migrated into this through the land, riding snow vehicles, sleds. So you can ride on the snow, similar to much easier than having a cart with wheels and things like that. And people went to Denmark, and so that's why Denmark becomes sort of this hub for the oldest rune stones, and from Denmark there could have been migrations north again after things became established once again, and that's where we get sort of this Proto-Germanic language starting to form, and it would migrate north again, and so our ancestors from Norway belong to a haplogroup, this sort of categorization of people, their genotypes, that can trace their ancestry to Arabia. So they're part of the haplogroup J that was preserved in the mitochondria. So mitochondrial haplogroup J, which has greatest frequency in Saudi Arabia. And so those were our ancestors, and um, and and so from Denmark is where we get the Anglo-Saxon migrations and all of the other migrations. The Germanic people migrated south. They um, had replaced the Celtic language speaking populations in the south, and then Slavic language speaking people around the year 600 AD had moved up to the coast. So a lot of these coastal cities can trace their history back to the Slavic speaking people. And they also had developed boats and things very similar to the Vikings. And so yet at that time, after that migration, most of the Germanic speaking people were west. And at some point, there was this great migration. I think that was around the year 600 AD, and they call it the migration period. And so that was when everyone migrated south. You had the Goths, who had migrated south along this river and to Ukraine and then Romania, all around there, and then had sort of somehow traveled all the way through the Roman Empire to Spain. The Visigoths, who had migrated from Central Europe down to North Africa. Oh, sorry, not the Visigoths, the Vandals. The Vandals who migrated. The Visigoths were just the Western Gothic people, and so these tribes were very mobile because they had horses, and they had marriages between the Roman Christian people. One of the princes of the Vandals in North Africa, his name was Huneric. He had a marriage with a princess from Rome who was Christian, and so that helped sort of unite forces. And yet the Eastern Christian people were connected to more of the Greek culture. And this all had begun in Israel, or in Caesarea, under the Roman occupation. And so Rome was taking over everything, and people were fighting, and people were killing the religious leaders that were supporting them or working together with them. And Jesus Christ didn't go to war against Rome, and lived in a way that helped people and taught things that intrigued people and made them think about how everything was connected, the kingdom of God, seeking some inner peace, some higher consciousness. And like many other people, he was killed, yet his followers were it made a big impression on his followers because he had resurrected. And that was an ancient teaching of Judaism, an ancient teaching of Kemet, where people's light, their essence, their would resurrect. And so some people believe that's a physical resurrection. Other people believe it's a metaphysical resurrection. Could be both, yet I believe more in the metaphysical resurrection. They saw many people that looked like him, that did things like him, and this was written hundreds of years after he existed, so it's possible that he had survived, but then, eventually died. And that, the narratives we have make it seem like he resurrected right away. It could be that he did die and he metaphysically resurrected. It's unclear. Yet it's the best history of Jesus Christ that we have, the Gospels and the Quran. And there are a lot of anointed people in the history of the Hebrew people, of the Judean people. Aaron was was the priest of Moses, and so the priesthood was anointed. All the sons of Aaron were anointed. You had people like Cyrus the Great, who was a Persian leader who, let the people return back to their land in Judea. And that's where we really get a strong connection, a strong identity of Judean people being the people of the region. Like the only people, the dominant, predominant people. Yet there was many different tribes in this area, and Benjamin shared a tribe with Judah. And so so this Cyrus the Great was another anointed person. You had anointed kings, because eventually this idea of a Melech, which started as a messenger, became the idea of a king, of one ruler. In the book of Samuel, it says that the people had no king, that God was king, but then God allowed them to have a king. And it says that the king's name was Saul, which is Sheol. It's a sort of infernal name, and he was ordered to genocide these people, and he didn't kill the animals, and so he lost his anointment. He lost his status as the king. And then David, whose name means beloved, became the king, and he, had killed Goliath and all these things. And so his violence was now permissible in comparison to sort of the violence of Saul. He was, not only did he do bad things, but he didn't do them well. And then now you have David, and he's looks great compared to him. That's a very different message from the foundation of the Torah of Cain and Abel, because Cain and Abel were the sons of Adam and Chava. And so what applied to them applies to all of humanity. It applied to the people in the narrative of the flood of Noah, where it was violence that caused God punished the world because it was full of violence. So the this is where Jesus Christ, Jesus the Anointed, Isa al-Masih, this is sort of the foundation of the logic of his thinking. And he would say, "Woe to the scribes and the Pharisees." And it's ironic because then eventually, the Bible was written, the New Testament, the Greek Bible, the Greek book was written, and it sort of became the same thing. A lot of things were written which are not necessarily true and confuse the original wisdom, and it was used by governments to gain power and to enforce law using violence and going to war and all these things. That wasn't the way of Jesus. And all the people who followed Jesus, the Christians, they were Mashiachim. They were anointed people. That's what it meant to be a Christian originally. And so the power that was established was in Rome, and it became established there because that was a sacred place. The Vatican was a sacred place for the people who lived there before, and so that had an influence over the history of Europe. Rome had been, prior to this, the empire of the region and had colonized Judea. They enslaved Judean people. In Pompeii, there's graffiti of Judean sex workers, prostitution, slave prostitution. And many of these people were Christian. Some of the first Christian symbolism appears in Pompeii. And so, Judean people were sent to the different parts of the Roman world. And I think Pompeii might be in Greece. And so, and it ended up, being destroyed. The volcano, killed them all. And so that's how the Judean people arrived to Rome. Some people, like Josephus, found privilege, but most other people didn't. And so then, they formed ghettos. That's where the first ghettos were. And so when the Roman Empire moved north, which had taken over the Gaul territory, the Celtic territory in France, had been going to war with the tribes in what we call Germany. That was, the Romans created that name, Germania. They had sort of just created a blanket term for all the people that lived north of the Celtic people. And so this was a time when the Germanic speaking people were migrating. People migrated to Britain, and they colonized Britain. Very few Celtic words in the English language, and this language was written in runes. And you can tell by the poems of the runes some things about him. So there's a poem where it says that the word lagus, the rune for the letter L, it's the water from a waterfall. And so this makes sense when you look at the geography of Norway and consider Carthaginian sailors. They're sailing to the um, the fjords and along the coasts, and they can't drink the seawater. They can only drink the water that's coming down from the lakes and flowing down to the ocean as a waterfall. And then that becomes like any sort of stream or any sort of water. The one of the oldest words here is, and this is one of the most important words probably, is this word ans or os. And this word in the Germanic speaking world and ended up meaning something like a deity. Yet what I believe is that it originally it meant rain. The rain, the water from the sky. And so this is something that arrived from Carthage because in the Amazigh language, the word Anzar meant rain. It was the deity for rain, but it just meant rain. And so that's what the Carthaginian sailors would drink on the journey, because there were no waterfalls on the journey. And that became also the word for words. That's why it means communication. And think of the rain, the waters falling from the sky to the waters of the ocean or the floor. It's communicating, and that's very similar to sort of the ideas in the Hebrew cosmology of a melech. You know, a melech is like a messenger or an angel, some force of nature, and Michael or Michael is this angel or messenger that represents weather, because it's similar to El. It's moving. It's like a cloud, you know. So it's all of this. Here we have the, you know, concepts of weather and communication and deity connected as well. So there's some logic behind these systems. They're not connected systems. I don't believe that they're connected necessarily. They could be. However, I think that they're just arising out of a logical interpretation of the world, observations like Baba Haru teaches. And so Anzar becomes Ans or Anzus. They gave it this suffix when they recreated it and or reconstructed it. And then there's another symbol that's another cow symbol. That's Uruz. And Uruz is related to the word Auric. The or of Auric is related to this word, and it's a cow. It's a milking cow, and the ok part of Auric is the ox. So that just those two words get put together, and it created the word Auric, which were these big cows, ancient cows, and they so Urus, the suffix us, again, it's this reconstructed sound. I believe that it comes from ansar or ans, so it's just saying the word ur, because any word is an as, and so it's just saying, you know, not necessarily the concept, but the word itself. So urus is the word that means cow, and cow is where you get your milk. So that was another source of water. And so all of these symbols became very important for the people that lived in Denmark because this is a very low lying region. If you dig a well, all you're going to get is salt water if you're near the ocean. So they would build mounds and they would live in these mounds. And then when the water would rise during a storm or anything like that, they'd be safe. Yet they'd have to drink the rainwater because there wasn't any clean water. And that's not the cleanest water you can drink. So if there's a volcano or a volcanic eruption far away or anything like that, that contaminates the water. Um, so the the these three symbols ended up repeating over and over, and it's called alu. And they say that that's where the word ale comes from, which ended up becoming the word for like a beer or like a another type of drink that was fermented, that was safe to drink. And because you have all these bacteria and stuff like that, that was the problem back then. The problem nowadays is a little bit different. We have a lot of other things that are contaminating our water, such as lead and metals and things like that, and minerals that we have to take into account. But one of the main things back then was bacteria, and so that's why I believe ale became the drink, the fermented drink, beer. And this some people had speculated that it could be, connected to the word Allah, but I believe that it is connected to the importance of water. And so the A in Alu is the rain, the L is the water from the stream, and the U is the milk from the cow. And there's another one that they call Laukas, and that one's very strange. If you read it on Wikipedia, it talks about all this just morbid stuff, and it just goes to show you how much people lost. That people lost so much knowledge with the Christianization of this part of the world. And so it talks about leeks. It says it's connected to the word leeks, like the sort of the garlicky thing, and the oniony thing, and something about horses and their private parts and their for breeding and virility, and so it's all just kind of messed up. And yet what I believe it is that each symbol is connected to an Oz symbol. So it's saying, Lagus, it's paired up with an Os, so it's, showing that this is referring to the word Lagus. And then it's Urus, showing that it's connected to the word Urus. And then the Os of the Urus is a little bit different. And so that's where they think that there's a K sound in it. But it's just, it's a little bit different. I don't know why it's different. And then there's a symbol called algis. And this algis symbol is it's so let's go. I'm just trying to find this. So here's what I'm talking about: the symbol of rain, the symbol of the water falling from the waterfall, and the symbol of a cow. These are things that were written into stone, like Paleo Hebrew, and they also are places where the swastika shows up. So that's a warning. And it's good to know this because this is where these are the roots of National Socialism, which were preceded by Zionism. Theodor Herzl had began talking about creating ethno-states and going back to this sort of ancient way of thinking, and that inspired, I believe, that if you read what followers of Theodor Herzl were saying, they wanted to create a nationalistic socialism. So eventually Adolf Hitler, who was a military spy, spying on this socialist group that had nationalist intentions, that was sort of scary, scary socialism, went and, sort of created what a lot of these people had been striving for various different reasons. But because of colonialism and all these things that I'll talk about later, there was a racism, a biological racism that was rooted into it, and so when this return to these ancient ways were created, it was created with a really hateful, very destructive sort of way, and so that's why these symbols are inappropriate. They're not to be used because people were genocided because of them, and so that was that symbol. Here we have more symbols, and so so you might be asking, why are these symbols important? Why does this matter? Well, if we speak the English language, we are saying the word God in the English language. And so here you can see in the middle here, this is the word God. This letter here that looks like an X is the G sound, and the middle symbol is the O sound, and the last symbol is the D sound. Yet the spoken language had preceded this symbol, this method of creating symbols. Because this symbol method, this writing system, was from Phoenicia. And in Phoenicia, they had developed this. This is why in Greek, this symbol is a he. And the X is a he sound. And the spoken language was from the Indo-European migrations, and the Indo-European migrations, like I said, had originated from here and had gone sort of following the sun. But the symbol of the sun hadn't arrived until the influence of Greece became greater. And in fact, there were two symbols for the sun. The sort of hate symbol you saw, the swastika. But the older symbol was the one that the Carthaginians had brought, which is related to the word shin, which is the symbol of a fire. So see here how we have a lot of different, and so it's basically this symbol here, because was written on stone. They have an extra letter, but it's basically the same thing. The letter is the rune. Now this rune was used by the SS, which is a criminal organization that formed as a bodyguard unit and ended up growing bigger than it was supposed to, becoming a military of its own, running the concentration camps, and committing genocide. And this word is, I believe that this word is connected to the Latin soul. That's really where it originated from. And because of migrations along the coasts, and so the people that had migrated this way had arrived with the spoken language. I believe that the Iranic language branch of the Indo-European languages, which is what we call Iran, priests arrived and they brought another word. So this is a branch of the Indo-European speaking people. One of the branches of the Indo-European speaking people is the Anatolian branch. And I've been wondering if that is actually the trunk of the language family tree. And so that could have been where people came from. And yet I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. These people, they traveled and they ended up colonizing India. And this ancient word that the Persian priests would say is this word that I'll share here. I have this special keyboard. It's called Keyman. The app is called Keyman. I'm on Wikipedia. I gotta go to a Wiktionary. So in Persian today, people say Khoda to mean Lord, God. And so this word comes from, it seems to be a cognate with this Avestan word that's Khwadata, self-determined. And so the Khwa is self, and Data is like, it sounds like it's going out. To me, it just seems like it's going on and on and on. And so it's not dependent on anything or anyone. Now that to me is a really important idea, because the priests would have gone traveling far away to spread this idea. Why? Because they wanted to teach people not to do sacrifices. Because this thing, this self that had created everything, that wasn't dependent on anything, that was sort of this pure source of everything, was not dependent on anything. And this word, I believe this sound of ha is the sound of breath. And the reason why I believe this is because of the Tetragrammaton. There is a article on thetorah.com. It says, Yahuwah, the original Arabic meaning of the name, says, I am from the root. Hua, yet believes, Professor Israel Knoll believes that it originates from Midian, derives from the Arabic term for love, passion, or desire, passion. And so there's a verse here in Hebrew where it uses this word in that manner, and it looks more like the root. So it says here, Hua, and this is impassioned. And so this thing is, there's many ways to describe it here. It is this concept of, in Arabic, it's love, affection, or passion, desire. And so this has to do with Moses' wife. Moses' wife was from Midian. And so what I believe is that this word was introduced from Persian. That's why the Midianites spoke that word. And it originally meant self, so it could mean I am, or it could mean love or something like that, because in order for things to work together, for things to exist, they need to work together. That's what Jesus would preach a lot about. And so that plays into, the problem of that people were suffering in Kemet, because of the cult of Set. It was, opposition, and this brother who had killed his other brother and represented the desert and war, so it became this thing of power, but it was rooted in something violent and oppressive, oppositional, and it wasn't even the main idea of the allegory. The allegory was about Asar and Ast, as Baba Haru teaches. And then, people don't even talk about Nebuchadnezzar, which was the other side of the narrative. And And so when Moses married his wife from Midian, it seems that, and there's an article about that in the Torah.com, it seems that is where this word becomes very important. And so this idea of something existing because it is functioning and working together, that the oppositional forces of the world which describe death, they are not the main force of the world. They are not what they're not that's not the nature of the world, and of the forces that created the world. So there's like a spiritual sort of otherworldly component to the worldview too. And so it's cool because it's all connected, seems like. And so this idea of self is not like we're talking about ourselves, but we're talking about a consciousness, a being that is all-encompassing, not dependent on anything or anyone. We are dependent on it. It is what gives us things. And since we're all dependents, the way that we serve it is by serving each other, and by seeking its help, and by servicing each other. And so that's why in this northern world, with less sunlight, we have this word become written down, and we start to get what eventually will become God. It wasn't until Wolfala that this word was written in a Gothic script, and that was based on Greek. So the Gothic script, just gonna do a photo. So that's not what I was referring to. This is the Gothic script. And so the word, God was the G, because that was the sound that tribe said for that letter, for that sound. And then it became, when the O, there's the O. I think it was O. They said U. They had a U sound. So people had kind of changed the way they said things. They had a U sound. And then they also had some tribes, instead of writing the symbol for D, they wrote the symbol for th. And so that's why it became, the word God became, or what became th. I think this is it here. So it looks like a P, but it's not a P. It's a different symbol. It looks like a P, but it's not. So I don't have it on here. But anyways, so it Wolfala became sort of the Christianizer of the Gothic tribes that had come down from Sweden, and yet they only translated the New Testament, the Greek Bible, into their language. So they missed out on a lot of context. and eventually disappeared because they went to war with people. They migrated really far. They were, killed by other people and assimilated to them, their cultures. Um, the survivors, the people who survived, of course. And and so yeah, so this is where we start beginning to see the word God with a G sound appear. And and so here you can see that somebody was probably, wanting good fortune. They wanted sunlight. They wanted for their food. They wanted water for their for them to survive, and they wanted help from God, this eternal, self-sufficient being that provides. And and so and and so see here that this is what we were chasing after this whole time. This word here ends with the symbol lagis, or sorry, algis, and you can see that these are the horns of an elk, the antlers of an elk, a European elk, which is what we call here in North America a moose. And so you have the waters underneath here, the waters of the stream, and which represent, Lagos. You have these droplets, which look like eggs. It looks like it could be an egg or something like that, but I believe it's rain. And so that's the water from this Anzus. Because it's all the way down here. It's falling. Now, this looks like it's a hat. So it's kind of funny because he's wearing a hat, and then here's this animal that's trying to eat it. So it's kind of funny. It's like, oh, he's eating the hat. But then there's this other one here. If it had been the eggs, you'd think that this one would be turned around. Or that there would be an egg over here or something like that. So, but these looks like raindrops. That's what I believe. And then, then you have cow, the water from the cow, but the water is a little bit different. It's communicating the word, but it's a little bit different. Maybe that's why they're trying to say it's a little bit different. And here we have the horn of the elk, of the moose, and it's saying here's one of the branches of the stream is down to the elk and near its udder. And so it's showing that this is the milk of the moose. And so moose milk is actually something that is the people drink in that part of the world, and they're starting to drink again. And so that's what I believe it is. People here are saying that it's a leek. I think that, private part that was on there maybe could have been someone drew that for it to be funny. And here we have another elk, and you can tell because of the shape of its snout. It looks a lot like an elk. And so there were probably parts of where they lived where there weren't cows, and so they were drinking elk milk. So it's just a medallion, a bractate that they would wear on their clothes, to remind them of elk milk and or moose milk. And so these these are sort of the ideas, things that I think about, and I couldn't really understand them unless I studied all these other ancient things. And it's to show that the dysfunction that there is here on this side of the world that we experience with what's happening now with President Trump, with colonization, the border, this stuff, you can't understand this stuff unless you go all the way back, because it was really the Roman Empire that created a difficult situation, because the Roman Empire went and expanded north for resources, had conquered Britain, had gone to war with the tribes, the Germanic tribes, and unfortunately they didn't have anyone like Jesus Christ, who had opposed in a nonviolent way and have created this new sort of radical movement that was pacifist. No one that we know of. Maybe there was some priest or something that did that, but we don't know of that. They're insignificant in the history. All we know about are the warriors, and so that really created a bad stereotype for the Germanic people, because now they are locked into this combative relationship with the Roman people and all the people that were connected to the Roman Empire. And they were enslaved by the Romans. They became the generals of the military, and that's how they, gained status. But they were really connected to the military, and it's through there that they gained favor. But it was a really a negative sort of relationship, and that came with a lot of negative stereotypes, and that live till this day. And uh, and those stereotypes, they come from some sort of truth. We see that in the colonization of Britain by the Anglo-Saxon tribes. They brought over their swordsmith technology, and they had these swords that were sharper than samurai swords. And the samurais, had from Japan had had sword, and so same thing in this part of the world. We see a flow of people. The people from that originally came from China, populated different parts, and then they began to separate, become different. And so in Britain, you have the Anglo-Saxon people, but they seem to have wiped out all the Celtic people, very few Celtic words in the language, and they had these swords that were really powerful to be able to kill people, and in a really bad way, and so it created a lot of dysfunction. It created because eventually they would become Christian, and then that same sword was going to be used against the pagan people and their belief, system. Where these people got this technology from, I don't know yet. What I believe is that the pagan religion in Denmark and in the Germanic speaking world underwent a confusion similar to the confusion that happened in Kemet and in Mesopotamia, where it originally was monotheistic, where the god or Wotan or Odin was considered the one force that had authority over everything because it was eternal, because it didn't need anything, and they gave it many narratives. They described it as the Father, similar to the Christian people had, from the Torah, had described, the Elohim as a Father, and they described it as, and then with all these narratives that were metaphoric to describe different aspects of reality and of intelligence and consciousness and things like that. So it then ended up becoming this war deity, and but there were other war deities. The word Tiu became associated with war too, and the word Tiu means the sky, and so I believe that the word Dios and the word Tiu are related, and let's see. I guess here, let's go to the letter. So here you have the symbol. Now remember, previously there was a medallion that had this symbol, but it had two symbols in going in separate directions. So here you have two of them on either side, and so this here in the middle is supposed to show, something as another name for God, and it seems like it's like a compass or something to guide you, because one side's different than the other, and so this symbol here is the Thor symbol. It was connected, possibly, seems like almost by somebody else. I'm not really sure. Um, and so, but this symbol here just meant the sky, because the sky was the source for all of the rain and the sunlight and all these things. And so this was the ancient word, the Indo-European word that came with the people that migrated from this region here, and that brought this word to all over Europe. That's why people in Greece said Zeus. That's why eventually people in Rome said, and it became, for the Greek Christians, became Theos, and then in Latin it became Dios, Deus. That's what it became in France with the French version of the Latin language. It became Dieu. And so this word, it meant the sky. The sky is part of the ancient, is also a Mesopotamian word for God, which is mentioned in the Quran. I would say I read it the wrong way. Those are hard to read. so in this here, it's Nebuchadnezzar's name was related to Nabu, which is this scribal, this idea of a scribe, but it became this deity. Everything related to scribes, everything related to. It's like Jehuti in Mfundishi Jehutimus name. This is a word that became a deity, and so yet this is the word for Nabu. This is the word for deity, and so it's this symbol here that became the symbol for what the Abrahamic religions call God Allah, or Allah Elohim. And in the Quran, it says that the ancient people believed in the sun, the moon, and Venus as being ilahi, these forces that they would worship. They would build pyramids. And so then I was taught on Rumble, like this YouTube alternative, where people say what they want, that the sky god, or the force of the sky, everything that came from the sky down, was called Enlil. And so these four forces were characterized by this symbol. But the symbol then became the symbol of Ilu, or Al, or Allah, which is the movement of everything, but particularly these four forces of nature, of everything falling from the sky, the largest celestial bodies in the sky. It could have been gravity. They could have noticed gravity. And interestingly, in the Quran, it also says that Jesus was brought up by God. And so that, to me, is a way of him saying that that Muhammad recited that Jesus had been brought up to God. If we're brought down to earth, being brought up is our final destination, is we're returning to God. And so yeah, in this case, it's linked to this concept of this ilahi, this ilah of Nabu. And so the wisdom of the Quran, the wisdom of the Gospels, the wisdom of the Torah, all say, Allah Echad, God is one. And so there are different names and things like that have El in them, like Ishmael and Israel, yet they're more teaching what Jesus taught, which was that, we are mortal forces, like the one force, like God. And so yeah, the symbol, we'd have to find where the symbol comes from. How we search here. So it's all connected to Arabic, and then if you go here, it's called Elum, Akkadian. Dingir, that's what I was trying to type, Dingir. It's also another name for it. I believe that Dingir is called that, and it's related to the word nitter, which is just the sound that the sound that it makes when you create the symbol, something like that. And that's what I believe right now. And uh, so everything that's coming down from the sky, that's a concept that is occurring in many different cultures. And I've heard that also too in some East Asian cultures, that is one of the names of God, that the heavens are, that the words relating to heaven are, have to do with God. And so this was a word for the sky. That's why it has a symbol of its own. This has its own symbol. Um, the other thing that has its own symbol is Thor. Thor has its own symbol. And here it says that it means giant. And so here we can see that these ideas, Thor, Tiw, all these things, they were words. And so there was one God, which was this eternal thing. Yet there were these cults that had formed around these other words. Yet we can tell, because these words are written on their own as symbols of their own, that they were not the same as, they didn't have the same place as these more universal or important names for, an authority above all. And so this, we tend to, because of what happened in the Nazi Germany, and we tend to think that Tyr or Tiw and Wotan are these evil things, and that Thor is good because of the Marvel movies, and everyone can talk about Thor and not be talked badly, and they won't be sort of shamed for talking about Thor. Yet Thor is, I believe, is the origin of the dysfunction that we see in the Germanic pagan world before they became colonized by the Roman world. Because this symbol, which means giant, which I believe appears in, is a Phoenician word. Let's see. If we go to the Quran, this is Surah Tur, the mount. So it's like a mountain, right? And, if you were sailing at sea, and, and you'd see a big storm on the horizon, it would look big like a mountain. And so you'd say, Thor. It'd be a big thing that you'd see on the horizon. Let's say cumulonimbus horizon. That's more like it. So, right, this looks like a big mountain. It looks big. And so I believe this is a Phoenician word, not a Carthaginian word, because the Carthage was a colony of Phoenicia. So you have Anzar, which is a word that is more indigenous to North Africa. Yet this is a word that came from Mesopotamia to the Phoenician people, presumably. That's where they migrated from, and they, because that's where Arabic most likely much later on got it from, and they went around, and so they said Thor is something dangerous, and then the narratives around Thor, the lightning, the hammer. Now that's important because the hammer became a the symbol that connected this to metallurgy. So metallurgy and the cult of Thor would have been most likely connected, uh, and so this is where you get the weapon making and all those things from, and that is the foundation of war, and that's why you have two war deities, Odin and and Tyr, but it wasn't that way originally. And before, I believe there was a hierarchy, and there was only Odin or Wotan, sometimes pronounced God or Godin, something like that, was this idea of this eternal self, this thing that was self-sufficient, self-driven, and if you took anything else as your God, that was saying that specific thing had authority or had those specific attributes, which is not true because all of these other things, they're words that are written down, and they are they're letters, and they're and they describe specific things in the environment, and so that's why in England, in Anglo-Saxon England, there was a lot of dysfunction, a lot of war, and the word war is related to the word guerra, and it means confusion, and that one of the reasons why people went down there and benefited to go down there was because of wheat. So wheat farming, which they called corn, because that's related to the word kernel, they were farming for corn and grains, and wheat likes the hot and the heat and the sun. And so that really was one of the reasons why people preferred living on that island. And so that was the Anglo-Saxon colonization. The Romans would come and would eventually fall apart. The Anglo-Saxon colonization happened after the Roman colonization. Let's be clear. The Roman colonization happened before the Anglo-Saxon colonization. Then you had the Norman, you had the Viking. You had the Vikings come from here to there. And then you had the Normans, which were Vikings who had gone down here to France, who had assimilated to the French people, and then now they went back. And so you have a lot of conflict happening in England. You have a lot of colonization happening in England. a lot of violence, war and other forms of violence to create all this dysfunction. And that's why the colonization of the Americas under British rule was so much more genocidal than under Latin American rule, under Spanish, under Latin European rule. And so the Roman Empire, when it had existed prior to this, had established a colony down here, called Cologne. And there's a lot of cities in the Roman Empire called Cologne, Colonia, anything like that. That's where the word colony comes from, colonialism. And so this part of the world was settled by Rome, and with it brought the Judean exiles, and a community formed along the Rhine River of people practicing the Jewish religion, originally from Judea, and they didn't assimilate to the Christians, where it was the religion established by the Roman Empire, that had continued with the followers of Jesus Christ. And many of whom, were misguided, not following Jesus Christ, not being Christ-like. And so in the 1300s, the Jewish people that lived here ended up becoming called Yiddish, because in German, Jewish is Jüdisch, so it's just another way of saying Jewish, Yiddish. And they were persecuted, and they traveled eastward, and so that's why we have a lot of Yiddish people all over Eastern Europe, and those were the victims of the Nazi regime, the National Socialist regime in Germany. In the late 1800s, Theodor Herzl lived in France, and he wanted to be treated fairly and wanted his people to be treated well, and didn't like how they were being treated in Europe, saw that there was an opportunity to go to Palestine, to live there, and wanted that. And so he wrote a lot about it, got a lot of followers. And within his writings, there was some ideas that would end up leading to a lot of suffering. And so at the same time, there was a lot of people talking about socialism, because people were suffering at their workplace. People were losing fingers, and they were losing limbs, and breathing in soot, and babies being born with problems, and fathers dying at work, and all these terrible things, mostly in England, where there was industrialization. They'd taken all the technology that had been developed in the Roman Empire, and it was at its peak in England, but it wasn't safe, and people weren't following Jesus. They weren't following the way of Christ to be an anointed person. They weren't following their way. They didn't even know about this stuff. So, people like Robert Owen, they wanted to create a better society, so they called it socialism. And people in Germany were also living this way, and so they got into it. And Karl Marx, who had belonged to this, was a descendant from this Yiddish community, had written about socialism so much that he became sort of the new leader of it, and he created all these new terms. Communism came from there. And so at the time, people wanted to sort of revolt and have a revolution like the French had against the ruling class. And but they realized that if they ever tried to do something, that the government and the people in power would get the Vatican to come in and the military, and so they couldn't do it just in one country. They had to do it in all the countries at the same time. And so that was the internationalist sort of perspective of the communist worldview. Communism became the new sort of perfect socialism. It became the new socialism that everyone talked about. These old socialist ideas from England, they were not as popular. And so eventually there was a revolution in Russia, and they went to war against people and kill a bunch of people in order to create this type of society. And people in Europe were also going out and fighting the police in the streets, and all of that chaos seemed very threatening to the people with power. They didn't want to negotiate. They were too slow to do anything to help the people. It was just a big mess, a big conflict, and people were really scared of what's happening in Russia, and people didn't agree with the communists. They wanted to have different ways of doing things. So Mussolini was a socialist who was after the time of Theodor Herzl, and created a socialism that was more rooted in sort of this Roman idea of national identity, and using Roman symbols like the fasces, and so that's why he became known as fascism. And that symbol appears also all over the Americas, because the USA and all these colonialist governments that sought independence from the colonial powers in Europe and became republics, they copied a lot of Roman symbolism, and so symbols of militarism, of the military sort of order and opposition, were used, like the fasces. But there are other symbols like the olives and things like that, the olive wreath, the symbols of peace, the dove. All those things are Roman. They were used by Roman people, and they're just not. They didn't contribute to suffering, so we don't feel that they're as important. And so the fasces created this concept that together they're stronger, and then together they'll fight the enemy and win. So it wasn't just about unity, it was about collectivized violence, and about national identity, of bringing Rome back, bringing that they hadn't known all this stuff about Kemet and anything like that, so they thought they were the center of the world. Everything revolved around them, but everything had shifted, so now they wanted everything returned back to that. And so that's where the word Axis comes from. Benito Mussolini used that word to describe Rome and Berlin would be the new Axis, because before Paris, and London were the places that everyone talked about, that everyone centered themselves around. And so with fascism, there was a new project for the Mediterranean, basically to recreate the Roman Empire, to colonize the parts of Africa that hadn't been colonized. And the world wasn't about it. They basically wanted to do what all the other colonial countries had already done, because, Belgium, France, and England, they had already done these things, yet they had decided that those things were wrong, and now people in Italy, like Benito Mussolini, wanted to do them again, but just for their own people. And so that's why Adolf Hitler was a military spy, spying on the socialist groups because there was a lot of crazy stuff going on. A lot of people being very violent, and and people were scared about these ideas, socialist ideas, nationalist ideas, and yet they must have not known that what sort of ideas had inspired Adolf Hitler and sort of who he was connected to is not very clear. Yet this idea of nationalism and of socialism became, um, in, important to him and many other people. Ideas that had began with to be talked about with Theodore Herzl, because Theodore Herzl had been talking about a very similar thing. Yet his people had been oppressed and had wanted to escape to another place to create their autonomous community, whereas these people like the Benito Mussolini and the Italian people, they had historical power, and likewise Adolf Hitler and the German people had their power over other people too. And I believe that Adolf Hitler was not from Austria originally. I believe his family was from Argentina. I believe his mother was from Argentina and had Native American ancestors and had possibly worked for a Rothschild. And so he was an illegitimate son of a Rothschild. And so that's why they received money secretly. Happened in the U.S. with a politician, and he had a daughter with a servant who was African American. Yet his mother was very light skinned for someone with Native American ancestry, and they grew up. He was probably born in Austria, and then grew up with some privilege. Yet this was sort of the borderlands between the German speaking world and the Hungarian speaking world and all the other people. And after World War I, there was a lot of refugees who came here. World War I was really the reason why fascism became popular, because Benito Mussolini received financial support from people from England to try to bring people from Italy into World War I. And so, but look at all this green. Look at all this farmland. People are farming. People are living. They're just trying to find a way to live. Yet with all this trauma, it's just hard to find a way to live. Hard to find the good things in life. Hard to drink good water. Eat healthy food. These cities that these people live in, they were, very, where are the trees? They were just starting to get full of automobiles, so the air was being polluted, and so that's sort of the way people lived, and it was dysfunctional. And so Adolf Hitler grew with this feeling of being different, but then also not liking the other people. And so that created this obsession about race and interest in being German. And I think that people thought he might have been Jewish, maybe, had some ancestors, and and so maybe they were using him for some greater plan that they had hoped to do once, Germany would create this, you know, new sort of Holy Roman Empire and take over, you know, Palestine eventually. But that never happened. And and the nationalist sort of narrative created this division where, all the Jewish people would wear their armband, which ended up becoming the flag of the state of Israel, and the German people would wear their armband that was for the Aryan people, was, for this new kind of idea that they had realized that, oh, we migrated from over here. Well, not everyone, because imagine, this is where the language came from. This is not necessarily where all the people came from. This is just where the people speaking the languages came from. And so you don't have to be part of the same lineage, physical lineage, to speak the same language. And then so that was the Aryan. They call that Aryan, and by calling themselves Aryan, they now felt that they were the oldest people of Europe. They were the most ancient, original people. And that's why everything in Rome was great and why it wasn't anymore. They didn't take into consideration anything about management of resources. They never thought, oh, what's the relationship between Greece and ancient Egypt, and the ancient Egyptians being black? At least not at the public level. One of Adolf Hitler's associates was from Greece, or sorry, was from Alexandria, and so people were also drinking a lot of sugary drinks, and their diets, weren't very good. People ate sausages, which a sausage really became the way to eat meat if you didn't have a steak, because there weren't enough cows for everyone. So you just take the trimmings and then you'd put them into an intestine, and then you'd eat the sausage, and so quality of life wasn't great for people, and so they're just had come back from a really traumatic war. There was a lot of dysfunction. People didn't know what was going on, and so what people had hoped to be this alliance between this nationalist group that wanted to establish a Jewish state and this nationalist group that wanted to create this German state and to unify what they hadn't been able to unify before, to use, what they had thought of as science, as biological racism and all these things. They were, misled, and they ended up, it was a very unequal alliance. It was a very unequal situation, an unequal truce. And so what ended up happening is that Germany, having had received its military from Prussia, had taken over, colonized all of Europe, and deported all the Jewish people to concentration camps, telling them that they were going to go to Palestine, yet enslaving them for the war and genociding them all along the process. And so Prussia is this state that was here in near the Baltics, and it was established by German. In ancient times, it was preceded by this colony of German-speaking knights who were fighting for the Vatican, who had gone to Jerusalem to take Jerusalem back and kill all the people there. The people were saying that they were Muslim. because they were peaceful people, and they believed in all these prophets, and the continuation of all the religion, but they didn't understand, and so they killed them all, causing more confusion than there already was to begin with. And um, and then they said, well, since the king of Denmark had just went in and killed all the he was a Christian king of Denmark, had gone in and killed all the Wends, then the Slavic pagan people of this part of what is now Germany that had migrated there, they said, we're going to do that too over here with the pagan people over here. So the last pagan people of Europe now had become colonized by German-speaking knights because of Rome, because of the Vatican. This is like around the year 1200. And since then, because of trade routes, German-speaking people grow in number and eventually form the state of Prussia, or the Kingdom of Prussia. And they fought the French, and then they fought the Austrians, and so they become very militarized with this sort of Roman military kind of order, and they ended up becoming the unifying force to create the national state of Germany, of Deutschland, and they unified all the people who spoke German. And but they hadn't been able to unify with Austria because of religious differences, because they were Catholic and united by the Habsburg families, which also were originally from Switzerland and were ruled over Spain and all of Latin America. And so this Prussian sort of militarism is one of the reasons why when we think of Nazis, we think of the military that they had, and the things that they did. And so the genocide that occurred in Germany began with the killing of innocent people with mental illnesses and other difficulties, because the society had deemed that they were unfit, so they didn't want them to spread their problems, genealogy, through having kids, through having offspring. And what people weren't unable to see is that some of these problems that they had were really consequences of industrialism, because people didn't take care of themselves or take care of each other, because they weren't Christians, really truly Christian to each other, and because they were going to war. Jesus Christ didn't go to war against Rome. They were going to war. They were causing all these problems. No one could ever organize and live like a good life and help each other live a good life. And so there was a lot of dysfunction, and they weren't interested in trying to find a way to be good people and to accommodate and to find like a nonviolent solution. They had been through so much war that they wanted to just kill them all. And so that's a really dysfunctional thing to do, because a lot of these people weren't really that messed up. They didn't have a lot of problems. So some of these people, they were what they called asocial people, and so they were just people that didn't have a job, who were doing things by themselves. Could have been someone like me, who people would be like, oh, get a job, or but they don't understand all the nuances of the ailments and the problems that are wrong with a person, of maybe why this person is suffering. Head traumas, damage, because people